Before we kickstart the event, a few thank yous. I love doing events for breeders because breeders are often the forgotten ones in the whole equation, but the other people who are also either forgotten or not acknowledged enough is actually sponsors. So I want to say a big thank you to Plusvital, who came on board, which is the second year. It's still a relatively new concept, but it's one thing sponsoring it, but if you were here at 5 o'clock to see the Plusvital team row in here and give me a serious dig out, it's very much appreciated, and it was a big, big help. So I'm also grateful for the continued support. It's bad now, I got emotional 5 minutes in, but it was a big, big, big help, and I'd say I was a bother if they didn't row in. Each of you have been given a goodie bag on each of your chairs. In it, there's promotional material and various information from the various speakers and sponsors. But also importantly, there are two pieces of paper in there. You'll see, or three, sorry. There are two printed questions in that, or printed card questions. So if you have a question throughout the event, because we're trying to keep it quite tight on time and get through a lot in the 2 hours, I would appreciate it if you have a question, write it down and write who the speaker, who it's most relevant to, who your question is for. If it's for all, just put down all, that's fine. And then we're going to give you opportunities throughout the event where you can pass the cards to Claire and to Amy. I hope you know you were getting the job of that. And then at the end, what I'm going to do is when we finish the interviews with each of the speakers, we're going to invite everyone back on stage and go through some of the questions again, or as many of them as possible. The other thing that I want to do is actually thank the 2022 speakers, and we have some of them in the room, and that is great to have because they got on board. They got on board last year when none of us knew what it was going to be or how it was going to go. It went down really, really well, and it's thanks to that then that I suppose so many people were willing to come, and the RDS wanted to put it back on again. And a big, big thank you to the RDS for allowing us to run the event as well. One of last year's guests who isn't at the show this year is Jan Grev, but just for the sake of the recording, I just want to congratulate him because I believe in the last few days he was voted the Breeder of the Year by the KWPN. So I just think it's nice timing for that. In terms of the running order, we are first going to hear a few words from Professor Emmeline Hill from Plusvital and to give you a little bit of background on Plusvital. Then we are going to have Thorén Hellsten from Sweden, followed by Bernard Le Courtois from France. After the break, we're going to have Alan Waldman, who I'm not sure if you like to claim Holland or USA, but both are your homes at this stage. And then the event is going to conclude with Ireland's very own Cian O'Connor. And then I will invite everyone back on stage. So, some of you are more familiar than others with our sponsors. I was absolutely delighted that some of our New Zealand friends that were over are already using it in New Zealand, so that's great. So what I'm going to do, once Emmeline has a chance to get a drink, I'm going to pass you over to Professor Emmeline Hill, the CSO of Plusvital, and I'd just like to first get a bit of a background on, I suppose, what is Plusvital, for those that don't know, what's currently on offer, and then we'll let you start with that, and then I have some other further questions for you on that front.
Thank you very much, Michael. On behalf of Plusvital, we'd like to thank you for a fabulous concept of this breeding talk and for an amazing lineup of speakers. So we're delighted to be able to sponsor this evening's breeding seminar. Plusvital is an Irish equine science company that was established almost 50 years ago to develop supplements and nutritional supports for the horse. At the time that it started, there was supplements and nutritional support in the form of supplements was a novel concept. And there are a few other companies in Ireland at the same time that were developing similar sorts of products. So Plusvital actually started out and establishing itself internationally in the Middle East and in Australia. So it's funny, all over the world, there are people that know Plusvital. It really started out with our flagship product, which is racing syrup, targeted for the thoroughbred industry. But over the years, our product range has expanded to not only racing, but also to the sport horse industry, to support performance horses, and also breeding. So we have a breeding range with cigarettes and so on. And I think probably from my perspective, I'm a professor of genetics in UCD, and my company, Equinome, which is a genetic testing company that I started in UCD 15 or so years ago. Plusvital and Equinome came together about 7 years ago, and I was really interested in that as a concept because of the strong emphasis that Plusvital put on the science behind the products that they develop. So we're very much a science focused and science-led company, and I run then the research and development aspect of the business and act as Chief Science Officer.
Thank you very much. And actually, one thing that I forgot to mention that's in your packs, Plusvital have very kindly given us an equine supplements hamper, which one of you here today will be lucky enough to win. So in each of your packs, there was actually another card that I got sidetracked, I meant to mention. So in that, it's asking you can pick one of two options, because some people here are primarily focused on breeding and some are coming at it from the sports side. So it's, what's your ultimate breeding goal or sporting goal? And rather than just have a competition where you fill in your name and your details and you put it in a box and somebody wins, I thought it's an opportunity for reflection. Often in horses or animals, we go through kind of day to day, it's like Groundhog Day sometimes, and we don't often take the time to think about why is it that we're doing what we're doing and what's the end goal of it. So just have a think about that during the event. Make sure to complete that. And then I think there's going to be a box at the back of the room, with probably down with Heather, that you can enter that, drop that in, and one of you will win a Plusvital hamper. So sorry, I'd forgotten to mention that, and I don't want to let that, I don't want to miss that. On the thoroughbred side, well, primarily we have a sport horse audience. I think what's on offer from a genetic point of view is still quite interesting if you're interested in horses at all. Would you mind just going into a little bit more detail on the genetic tests that Plusvital currently offer, how they came about and what they are, please?
Sure. So about 15 years ago, we made a discovery in UCD, in my research group, that we could make a prediction about the racing potential of a horse in terms of its distance aptitude. So for thoroughbred horses, many are bred to be sprinters, some middle distance and others longer distance horses. So we were able to identify that there's a gene called myostatin, which we nicknamed then the speed gene, where you could read the DNA code of a horse and make a prediction based on its genetic type as to whether it would be a sprinter, a middle distance, or a long distance horse. And this has, I suppose, the value in the industry in terms of knowing how to breed a mare if you know that you have a sprinting type in terms of the genetics, the type of stallion that you might choose to complement that mare depending on your breeding goal. And it's all about, obviously, about the breeding goal. So that's our, I suppose, our flagship genetic test is the speed gene test, and people use that to inform their training decisions and race placement, so that they're getting the best out of the horse and able to maximise the genetic potential of each individual, because they know early on what the genetic type is. And then also for breeding, and it's becoming more and more important for breeding. The breeders know what the genetic type of their mares are, so they can choose a stallion that's most suitable for them. So while that's a very much a thoroughbred focused test, the concept is the same. It could be applied also in terms of breeding in breeding sport horses and performance horses, knowing the genetic aspects of a mare and being able to match that mare to a stallion that complements the genetic makeup of that mare.
Great. And I know there are some members in the audience, while people are breeding sport horses for different disciplines here, different types of sport horses, different goals, I know there are some breeders in the audience who have a more traditional focus in their breeding programs. Some of you may have already seen the piece that came out with yourself and William Micklem, I think a few months back, or maybe even last year at this point. But would you mind just touching on what research you've been doing on the traditional Irish horse, please?
Yeah, so we started a research project on the traditional Irish horse in collaboration with the Traditional Irish Horse Association a number of years ago, because of the question of what would the impact be of the breeding of warm bloods and bringing more warm blood genetics into the Irish horse population. Is that going to change things? Is it a problem? What impact would that have? And what we were able to do is we compared Irish sport horses that had certified traditional Irish bloodlines to Irish sport horses that had some warm blood in their pedigree, and we were able to identify genetic signatures that would allow us to, I suppose, classify a horse as a traditional Irish horse, regardless of whether it had a pedigree or not. And one of the issues in assigning traditional Irish status to an Irish sport horse is that sometimes some information in the pedigree may be missing. But it means from genetics, by taking a blood sample from a horse and looking at the genetic aspects of an individual, we could assign a traditional status on the basis of its genetics. It's really amazing what the technologies can do now. We've come such a long way in the last 10, 15 years since the horse genome was sequenced, that the technologies allow us to really look into what really has been inherited. So we're going beyond the pedigree. You can look at a pedigree and I suppose imagine a pedigree being sort of two-dimensional. But the DNA gives you another level of insight into really what's going on. So that's what we tried to do.
And then just lastly, because I remember hearing a talk in Kildare previously and listening to what was being done on the thoroughbred side, and then us as kind of the jealous sport horse breeders are listening on, wondering what's going to be possible. In terms of your own research on the sport horse side, and as much as you're in a position to go into, will you give us an indication of the type of things that over the coming years will hopefully be possible for sport horse breeders from Plusvital's genetic offerings?
The sport horse sector is a really exciting one to be looking at for the future. There are several scientific studies that have been published that have identified genetic markers for show jumping ability, and they're in European warm blood populations. It's quite difficult to sometimes translate those into genetic tests because it depends on the background of the population, and a lot of validation work needs to be done, and I'm not aware of any genetic tests for jumping performance as of yet. But probably more importantly, I think, would be looking at traits like soundness, longevity in the population, and behaviour traits. These are the things, temperament traits, I think in particular, if you don't have a horse that has a good head or a good brain to train it, it's never going to be able to be a superstar in any case. So these are the sorts of things that we will probably be able to address in controlled scientific studies, as well as looking at sort of scope and jumping performance. But I think there's a lot more to it than that. But it's very important to remember that none of these tests are going to be diagnostic, you have it or you don't have it. What we're talking about, these sorts of traits are known as complex traits, where an individual might have a genetic profile that has a risk of. And that's really good news, actually, from a management perspective, because if you have a risk for something, it gives you the opportunity to manage the horse to mitigate against that risk. So really what it's all about is to empower you as breeders and as producers of horses to have that knowledge and have that information so that you can better manage your horses to get the best out of it and to maximise its potential.
Super. Thank you very much, and thanks for giving some explanation on that. Could you please put your hands together and show your appreciation for both Professor Emmeline Hill and the whole Plusvital team. So at this moment, I would like to invite our first international guest to the stage. If you'd like to take a seat, Emma. So, joining me on stage is Emma Thorén Hellsten. I had the privilege and the opportunity to spend the guts of 2 weeks with Emma travelling around New Zealand, and if nothing else, it gave me the opportunity to learn how to pronounce your name. So I think I got it by the last, maybe when we were checking out of the last hotel, I think I got close to getting the hang of it. As you'll see through tonight, there's actually, for those of you who are familiar with my podcast, there's actually a Big Talk link throughout all the speakers. With Alan, with Bernard and with Cian, I've interviewed all three of them. And with Emma, how we know each other is because of Big Talk, and Emma actually interviewing me because of Big Talk. And actually making me cry on a podcast, which now, after how I started tonight's event, doesn't seem like a once-off.
It wasn't that hard, though.
Yeah, but I suppose we've been involved in a few different projects together, from talks to breeders here, from doing the podcast to doing webinars, to meeting an incredible bunch of Kiwis and having the trip of a lifetime. And there are so many different interesting conversations and debates that we've had. Emma was previously the breeding manager for the Swedish warm blood stud book for 14 years and has been involved in co-founding and chairing scientific committees with the WBFSH, and on top of that has been involved in breeding and riding, and has a very well-rounded insight into the sport horse world, as well as on top of that having a PhD in genetics and a PhD in international sport horse evaluation. Is that correct?
Correct.
What I'd like to know, just to start off, in your 14 years with the Swedish warm blood stud book, maybe if you wouldn't mind touching on maybe some of the biggest challenges when you started in terms of as a population, but some of the most, maybe then moving on to some of the most positive outcomes or trends in Sweden at the moment in terms of sport horse breeding.
Yes, when I started, first of all, I would just like to thank you for being invited. I'm very honored to be here tonight and in excellent company with the other speakers. I'm really looking forward to listening to you, and it was really nice to listen to Emmeline as well. Regarding your question, when I started at the Swedish Warm Blood, I think they recruited me because there was a lack of knowledge in general about breeding or the genetic part of the breeding. Sweden is, in terms of breeding, a very small country in Europe, having about 5% of the sport horse mares. I think we have about 5%. And the average breeder has 1 to 2 mares. So there are very few professional breeders in Sweden, and also it's a huge turnover in breeders. And I think that has changed, though. That breeding has become more professional. It's still not that we have the huge studs and breeders don't have a lot of mares, but I think one of the things that I have contributed to is to increase the awareness of the genetic part of breeding, create systems so that also a beginner breeder or the average breeder can access information Because if you have a tradition of breeding in your family, or if you're coming from a big breeding family, you have that with you. It's more easy accessible. But the typical breeder in Sweden didn't have that. So we had to make more information available to more breeders to make the quality all over of breeding better. I think the best breeders would never have any problems to access that type of information, and they were really well informed. But by making all of the breeders better, I think that the average quality increased in Sweden.
And something throughout the various conversations, something that has come up a few times, and there's been different debates and discussions on the changes, is you have, say you worked for a stud book for 14 years. At this moment in time, like, what do you define as a stud book, and how do you see that role and definition is actually changing throughout the world at the moment?
Well, I think most of us know what the stud book was historically and how they all started, but today I think the stud books are becoming, this is on the warm blood sport horse side, not for traditional breeds or ponies, but for the warm blood sport horse, I think that stud books have become more of a brand, actually, because we're more or less using the same genetics all over the world. So today it's much more what the stud book can bring to the breeder in terms of marketing possibilities, information, but I would say especially marketing today. And before, I think breeders were proud to belong to a certain stud book, and you registered all your foals in the same stud book, and you were faithful to your stud books. Today it's so different. The freedom of choice has spread also to the breeders' world. So you might use a stallion that's not approved in your traditional stud book, and you get the foal registered in another stud book that approves that stallion. And breeders switch stud books. Almost every year. Not all of them, of course, but it's much more common today than it was. For the good or for the bad, but I think the scene has really changed.
And I guess you've been in a situation both in the Swedish Warm Blood, but also being involved in the World Breeding Federation. What do you think as a whole? I know this is a very general kind of comment or question, but is there something that you see that they could all be doing much better for the breeders?
Cooperate. I think that the breeders have found out how they want to work. Like, they want freedom of choice, they want easy accessible information. The breeding today is international. Breeders and horses travel all over the world, but the stud books have still not learned how to cooperate when it comes to exchange of data, exchange of information, making it easier for the breeders to be mobile, so to say. So I think that the stud books could become much better on cooperation still. Yep.
Because I think when I think in my first year of university, I was hearing, I think we got a presentation on interstallion, was that what it was called at the time?
Was it here?
It was here.
Possibly Jan Philipson?
No,
Okay.
but it was, at the time it sounded great about this, like, European cooperation in terms of all the information from all the different stallions feeding into one thing, and it sounded great. Now, it's a good few years since I was in my first year of college now at this stage, and it doesn't seem to have really progressed, and I think that's something even in your own work you've
Yes.
come up against the challenges of
Exactly, because my PhD project was actually part of the interstallion project, and we could finalize some parts of it, but a lot of it we couldn't do because the stud books wouldn't cooperate in exchanging data, because they were so protective and afraid of the competition. And that doesn't serve the breeders. So this project had still not realized.
And actually, just something in an earlier conversation that I meant to mention when Emmeline was with us was that even on the tests, like that they're a tool, and it's not with the intention of replacing horsemanship and training and the knowledge that's already there. It's another tool. And similarly, on the genetic evaluation point, it's another tool. but again, when you've had a chance to have a drink, you might just talk in your opinion, from your experience and your work as a geneticist and your work as a breeding manager. What do you think genetic evaluation can bring to the table for breeders?
Well, to return to what I started with, I think to the professional breeders and the experienced breeders, I don't think breeding values can bring that much, especially not breeding values based on competition performance, because it's really hard. You know, statistics can be really helpful as long as you put in the right data. But if you don't put in the right data in the right way, it can just as well tell you nothing. What's happened the last few years is that most of the stud books introduced something called the linear scoring system. I don't know if you're familiar with that, a way of scoring the horses in a not valuating way, just descriptive. And if you apply the breeding value estimation on the linear scoring, you get very nice pictures of the inheritance of stallions in more detail, not only if they're good or bad, but what does the inheritance of the stallions really look like. Also for the mares, if they get enough offspring. And I think that's really useful. The breeding values for sport could have been useful if they would be included in a much bigger perspective, if we could have had data from all over the world, from all kinds of competition, not only the best ones, because it's really easy that they get skewed. They do give some information. I wouldn't say that they're useless, they're not, but you have to know so much to be able to interpret them. And I think that often results in breeders not having confidence in the breeding values. But the breeding values that are on the linear scores, I think they're much more hands-on and very much more useful for the breeders. And the next step that Emmeline was talking about, the genomic breeding values, or even DNA tests to see if the horse have genes for a specific trait, that would be the next step from that. You could get a lot of information from the linear scoring to use to try to find specific genes. There won't be one gene for the jumping traits, so to say, not even for the behavioral traits, but it completes the picture. So for the average breeder, it can contribute with a lot of information. And not all of us are fortunate enough to live in the middle of Belgium or Holland and can go to shows every weekend to see all the offspring of the horse, but this makes it possible even for breeders in Sweden or New Zealand to get a better picture of the inheritance of both stallions and mares.
And on that point, on inheritance or heritability, from your experience, from research that you've overseen, other people's research, could you talk a little bit about the heritability of certain traits, and maybe some of the traits that, in your opinion, are most heritable or least heritable?
Well, when it comes to heritability, it tells us about how much about the variation we see between horses that's actually heritable. And the problem in sport horse breeding is often to see how can we measure it to see what's heritable and what's not. Because the better you can measure, the higher you can make the heritability. And something that's easy to measure, take for example height at withers, gets a really high heritability because you can't make it is really accurate. But when it comes to measuring something like temperament, which is really difficult to measure accurately and in a consistent way, you get a low heritability. That might not be because temperament in itself or temperamental traits are less heritable, but because it's so difficult to measure. One thing that have proved to be really heritable, even though it's not very clearly defined always, it's scope. It has a really high heritability in all the studies that have been made so far. Scope, takeoff, when it comes to jumping as well. Something that has proven to have a low heritability is temperament, as I told you before, almost all temperamental traits. Fertility is another thing that has shown low heritability, but we know it doesn't have low heritability. It's just very difficult to find the right measures. Stance of legs have shown low heritability, and that it's not that it's extremely difficult to measure, but you can also you can do things, we can manipulate it. So I don't know if that's why it's got low heritability, because as a breeder, I think legs are usually quite heritable, or the leg stance is quite heritable. But when you look at the figures, they're not. So it's complicated. But worthwhile knowing that even if a trait has a low heritability, if the genetic variation for that trait is big, there is still a lot of chance that you can improve that trait or change that trait through breeding. So it's not all about heritability. You also have to look at the variation within the breed for that specific trait.
And what I've found interesting in the different things that we've worked together on, and hearing you speak at the different talks, is with the findings in terms of heritability, and from going around the world and talking to good breeders, that the two actually matched up. Because not always what we think as a breeder and then what, say, we read in a research paper or something will align or feel right with us. But with a lot of breeders that you go around, often it's back, and I've said this before, but you have these small, careful mares that are the mothers of a lot of these great horses, because for the breeders they feel like that the most important thing is like that, that they're blood and they're careful, they're quick and careful, and that it's a lot easier then to add in the size and scope. And then from hearing you talk, that they are some of the most heritable traits, which is good to hear. It kind of completes the picture, and it kind of solidifies that further in my mind. I think it's very difficult actually to cover. I know it's only like a brief insight into each person's area of strength, and it's trying to cover lots of different things in a short space of time here. But when you visited Ireland last year, one part of your presentation, I think, focused on this idea of like looking into the crystal ball in terms of trends, concerns, kind of risks to the sport horse world. Could you just maybe touch on some of those at the moment, the directions that you see, either things going or any concerns that you have, or even if there's something positive that you see for sport horse breeders coming down the track in terms of like global trends?
Well, I think one trend is that what I already talked about, that you see that breeders are nowadays international, and breeders drive the development in the way that the information you as breeder ask for and try to find, someone will produce it, and if the stud books won't, there will be private companies doing that, and that's already happened. You have Horse Telex, Hippomundo, and even more producing information, and have international databases, which is actually started by breeders entering the information themselves, and from that producing interesting statistics. So I think that in terms of information spreading will move more and more away from the stud book into private companies. That's the trend I see. And I don't know if the stud books will catch on to that, or if it will just continue the same way. Good or bad, I don't know. But I think I see that development. I think another, to have a look at in the crystal ball, I think it's extremely difficult for the breeders today to know what to breed for in the future, because so far it's been all about improving the horses, making them better competitors, and we have amazing competitors today when it comes to jumping. But it's so much around us changing now. With the environment, will this sport even be allowed? Will we be allowed to transport horses all over the world in 10 years of time? Will it be like, how will the public see upon us having fun transporting horses all over the world when there are all those climate concerns? Also, the social license to operate. Will it be okay to ride horses? We don't know that. There are many of those discussions going on now, which will, I think, heavily affect how we use our horses in the future. And how shall a breeder adapt to that? What horse will be the best horse or the most easiest horse to sell in the future? Will it be the top competitor, or will it be a totally different kind of horse? I think it's really hard.
Yeah, and actually when we did a recent webinar for our friends in New Zealand, one thing that actually you touched on that's relevant to that when you're talking about all these top riders and what we're looking for. Will you touch on the job of a rider looking into the future versus the job of the breeder looking into the future, if that makes sense?
Yeah, the breeder really has to look into the crystal ball and try to see in it and know what to produce from 10 or 15 years from now, whereas the rider just have to pick the best ones right now. And I think not all breeders, of course, but if you ask a breeder what should you breed for, they will usually model their answer on their best horse for the moment. The rider, sorry. Yeah, the rider would do that. Not all riders, but a lot of them. But what you can be sure of is that in 10 or 15 years' time, that would probably not be the same horse as they were sitting on today. That would be an entirely different horse. So it's really hard to go to the breeders to ask what to breed for, because they will give you the answer on what's the best horse today. And of course, some of the qualities will be the same, but yeah, you have different jobs.
And that's what we were discussing in this webinar, was that when you're making any of these breeding decisions, we often think we're breeding with next year in mind or next year's sales in mind, but actually if you're breeding for high performance sport, you're not breeding for 2024, you're breeding for 2034. And it's to just maybe keep that in mind. Lastly, so as you know, with each of the podcast episodes or the interviews, I end each interview with the same question. And it's, what advice would you offer to a young breeder or to someone at the start of their breeding program? What I'd like to do today is put a twist on that. So you have met and worked with and been a breeder. So I'd like two things from you, please. What advice would you offer to the young breeder or someone starting out? But then the second thing is, you have pursued an academic route through the horse industry, and I think that's an important thing to reflect on. Often if we want a life in horses or the horse industry, it's like we have to be a rider, we have to be a breeder, we have to be a groom, but there's actually lots of routes to have a very fulfilling career in the horse world. So I'd like advice for a young breeder, and I'd like advice for someone who wants to pursue the equine industry somewhere around the world from an academic perspective.
Okay, how much time do we have? For the young breeder, I would say that I think one of the most important things you could ever do is to get mentors. Not only one, but preferably more than one mentors, really experienced, successful breeders, and most breeders would be happy to share their information with you. And it's so good to have someone to discuss with and say bounce your idea, bounce off. That's one thing, and the other thing is that get the very best mare you can get. It's all about the mares, always the mares. We usually talk about that. But you could probably get some good advice from a good breeder what mare you should get, or even cooperate around mare. Perhaps start by helping out to choose stallions for one of their mares. Like, start in the small, but do start by contacting an experienced breeder. When it comes to an academic career, a young person who wants to make an academic career...
If you were advising yourself when you were starting off on your education, say, into the genetic world, or if you were talking to your younger self, or somebody came to you and said, I'd like to pursue a similar career, or I want to be the future breeding manager in Ireland or New Zealand or in France, how would you have any advice for them, or is there anything that you do differently if you had to go back and do it all again?
That's a really hard question. I think if you want to be in breeding and breeding management, or something similar to a breeding manager, it's not enough just having an academic career. You will have to have one foot in both the practical world and in the academic world. And academics can be fun, especially if you can connect the two, like the practical world and the academic world. But there are also room for those that only want to pursue an academic career, and there's so much, like Emmeline explained, there's so much, it's going so fast in genetic research, for example. And not only genetic research as traditional genetic, but also epigenetics. This field is enormous. But to just, if you're really nerdy, like you're really interested in one thing, why not pursue that and do something that you are passionate about? Because then you usually get good at it if you have a passion for it. So don't be afraid of pursuing something that might seem very narrow and nerdy, because it might be that pays off in the end.
And it's a very good point, and I hope my own father doesn't mind me mentioning this, but when it was coming time for me to decide on what I wanted, there was lots of conversations about pigeonholing or picking a niche. It was hard to probably pick more of a niche than ending up doing equine business or pursuing equine. Now, thankfully, they talked me out of doing something far worse, so that worked. But it is amazing, you are right. If you're really, really into something, from my perspective, it doesn't matter how niche it is. And just before we finish, it's a good opportunity to just mention, if you have questions for any of the speakers throughout the night, don't be afraid to write them down on a card and pass them to Claire or to Amy, and then we'll take them up at the end. And just another reminder for the phones, please, if you wouldn't mind, just to have a check if anyone hasn't already put them on mute or airplane mode. So it was nice to turn the tables and to actually get an opportunity to interview you back. And to you and to everybody that's actually travelled over here and given up their time to do this. Not everyone rushes to do public speaking, so I'm really appreciative. We set out and we had 4 speakers and we had a wish list, and all 4 speakers accepted and have come, and I'm very, very grateful for that. So can you please put your hands together for Emma Thorén Hellsten. So from Sweden we go to Normandy in France, and I welcome to the stage Bernard Le Courtois.
You have to speak more slowly now.
I'll try. And my French is terrible. I wasn't a very good student when it came to that department. Bernard has been an incredibly successful breeder, stallion owner. You were a journalist. You became the editor of the French sport horse magazine Le Prince.
Many years ago.
Many years ago, but you still did it. And if that wasn't all enough, you were also president of the Selle Français Studbook in France for a while. You've seen the industry from lots of different perspectives. And also, even this week, you've gotten to see Ireland and Irish horses from lots of different perspectives as well. If speaking at this event wasn't enough, Bernard has a long list of classes that he was judging. A few years ago, or I think this is probably the second or third time or more that you've judged. Third that you've judged in Ireland. What I'd like to know first, before I get into some of my other questions, is what has your opinion been on what you've seen here in these past few days, and how has that changed, or if it has changed, since you first judged here?
First of all, thank you very much, and to invite me. Please be patient with my English. I am French, not Swedish. It's very difficult to me to speak English. About the horses that I saw during the week, I suppose they was selected before to go to the final. The average was very good. but just a few was incredibly exceptional. For example, I fall in love with a filly, a 3-year-old filly who won everything. She's, I say she, but my partner, my Jewish partner said it, but for me it's impossible to say it for an animal. For my dog and my horse, I say she or he. And she is an exceptional sport horse. She had a magnificent conformation, very good movement, and a very nice expression with a fabulous eyes. For me, it's a perfection. It's a horse that I like to breed, and I am very happy to judge this type of horse, because here it's finite. You have no bad horse, but when you judge selection, for example, 80% of the horse that you have to judge are not interesting, and it's boring to see them all the day for many hours. But when you find the top horse like that, it's a fantastic moment, and you forgot all the others.
And when you found her, because when you're judging here, especially in the showing classes, you're not told who's who. So they're trying to make sure, and that's with getting international judges as well, it's trying to make sure that the decisions are as impartial as possible, but also they don't give the judge a catalogue. So you're judging the horses that are in front of you. But was this the filly that there was a bit of a funny coincidence, even though you're judging blind? What happened?
The speaker comments the event during the judgment, but where you are concentrate on the horses, and when you are in the middle of the ring, you can't hear what the speaker said. And he said, but I didn't hear. I'm sure I didn't know that my best filly was not Irish but Dutch, imported, and her maternal grandfather was my stallion Fergarmai, one of my most beautiful horses that I bred.
So
maybe in my unconscious, I recognize her grandfather.
And I think that's incredible, and like that you, the horse that stands out the most from you from all your days judging here, and the one that you pick as the champion, without knowing what any of them are, is out of a mare by your stallion. I think that's incredible. You talked about selection, and yes, to get to most of the classes here, they've had to go through tough competition, both in showing and in show jumping. In terms of your own selection, it's something that you have been doing for quite some time. In your stallion selection, in your broodmare selection, you have been very successful in breeding sport horses, in breeding thoroughbreds, and even, as I was joking when we did the interview at your farm a few years ago, you've also gone and had incredible success breeding dogs. It's like you seem to be able to turn your hand to anything and breed champions. What I'm most interested in here, for the benefit of the attendees, could you talk about your broodmare selection? And when you were starting out, or now when you're looking at your homebred fillies, what are you looking for in a broodmare? What are the things that are most important? And maybe some of the things that you will not forgive, that if they have those traits, they're out, because that can be difficult, especially for younger breeders or less experienced breeders, is selecting those mares.
I can tell you an experience that I had maybe 15 years ago. I made the selection for the auction in France, and I visited a new breeder, a young breeder. They have many mares, around 20 mares. They use the best stallion in Europe at this time, and I have to see 10 or 12 foals by, at this time, Heartbreaker, Nimerdor, and so on, Jalisco, and so on. All the best stallion in Europe. And finally, I did not select so many foals. And the breeder was very, very disappointed. And he asked me to explain why. And what they have to change in the organization and the selection of the breed. I say, it's not my job. I'm not here to give you advice. And they insist. And finally, we take a coffee and I explain that they have too many mares for the space, for the farm, and especially the downline of the mare was absolutely not interesting. No international winner, no Grand Prix winner in the timeline at the first, second, and third generation. And okay, they improve the mares using the top stallion, but that's a very long way. Maybe you can't bring everything to the mare at the first generation. And you can start with a normal mare or your saddle horse or riding horse, but you have to improve every generation, and maybe at the third or fourth generation you can produce 1.40 m Grand Prix horse. But maybe earlier if you are very lucky. But I explained to these people that you have to. Hopefully your mare are very young. You have to sell them for saddle horse, and with the money of the 20, you buy 2 or 3 top filly with a top genetic, top downline, top jumping quality, and you start again only with this one. If you have the possibility, you make embryo transfer every year to have more foals, but you stop to breed with this mare. And she say. Thank you for the moment, but she called to the agency and say, I never want to see again this guy. And they never change anything. And 10 years later, they stopped to breed. That's a pity. And it's a very good example, not good, bad example, because many people breed with the mare they like, but it's not often the best mare. If you are a private breeder and you have only one mare because you ride the mare before or because your children jump 1.20 m, you can breed with them, but you don't hope to produce a 1.60 m Grand Prix horse. You can improve your mare, and if the mare jump 1.20 m, but maybe the offspring will jump 1.30 m or 1.40 m. But the probability that the offspring jump 1.60 m is very poor. And if your goal is to produce top horse, top jumpers, or top eventers, or top dressage horse, it's the same. You have to select the mare, the best mare, and the best timeline. And if you like at the moment, until 4 or 5 years, you have every week 3 to 5 auctions online all over Europe. And if you look at the timeline of the fall, so for a lot of money, the timeline are all the time fantastic. If you have a poor timeline with the same stallion, with a poor timeline and a top timeline, the fall could be sold 10,000 euro or 50 or 70 or 100,000 euro. The timeline makes a difference, and that's very, very important. The breeder who start must have just a few mares, but the best one as possible.
And you have bred horses that have succeeded at a high level in eventing and show jumping. You've bred horses that have gone to the Olympic Games, the World Championships, and won some big events around the world. With their mothers, or the mothers of good horses that you have produced, are there any traits that those mares have shared, or are there specific traits that mares must have for you before you will breed with them?
I like the horse with blood. I use, in the past, Thorén stallion. I am very lucky because I was the owner of two of the best stallions in France. My first stallion. I started to be a breeder with Laudanum, who was a thoroughbred, small chestnut thoroughbred, who jumped with Cian O'Connor before that too. It was an incredible horse. And he was a grandson of Moon. And Moon, in the 60s, 70s, was never produced for show jumping, but many of thoroughbred from this sire line jumped very well. And 10 years later, I want to find a new thoroughbred stallion, but only a stallion who jump in Grand Prix. Because I choose today one stallion at the thoroughbred stallion selection. But we don't. I look at only the conformation, the balance, the movement. That's important. But the most important things for all the horse and all the discipline of the sport is the quality of the ability. If you want to breed a race horse, you never use a stallion who didn't win anything. If you want to produce a dressage horse, you will use a stallion, maybe not Grand Prix winner, but who have the conformation and the ability to be a good dressage horse. It's the same for the jumping, and I think it must be the same for every breeding. Celle français, and Thorén also. And I have my two best stallions, thoroughbred stallion, who was winner in Grand Prix. The second one was Hellsten, who won in races too, but also in dressage, in small Grand Prix, and then in World Cup Grand Prix. And he produced, because he was a wonderful, magnificent with a magnificent conformation, a fantastic movement, and a very good ability for jumping. He was a top stallion who produced a winner in the World Championship show, in the Olympics, and so on. And I think that is very important. And maybe the quality of my horse come from the blood. And in the conformation, I like the horse who have the thoroughbred type, with a fantastic eyes. For example, one of my famous stallions was Alligator Thorén. He had big eyes, wonderful head expression. And I think we never heard that now with the new breeder, but on the past, the breeder take a lot of attention at the eyes of the horse. I won't say eyes is the expression of the mantle.
You have had an incredible stallion career, and you've been very very fortunate. You have to make your own luck sometimes. And hand in glove, laudanum, and most famously, Alme, who there'd be very few breeders in the room that are breeding sport horses, especially with any warm blood pedigrees, that their breeding program hasn't been affected by Alme. But what I'm wondering, when we spoke in Brumal the last time, we were also talking about some of the challenges of stallion ownership at the moment. Do you still see a future for private individuals who own stallions?
No, I am old. I think I will stop to work in a few years, and I think it's my job. A private stallion owner with just a few. I think this type of job will be over, because now the successful stallion owner are the big company, and now, for example, in France we have GFE. It's a cooperative, and the biggest stallion owner are maybe like a trust, because there is a connection between GFE and Paul Schockemöller, and before there was GFE and VDL, and they promote each other together, the stallion, and when they promote a new stallion, they have a real impact on the market, and there is a new thing. When I start to breed with Laudanum, Almay, Handing Glove, and so I Love You, and so on, there is a quota in France. I don't know the word in quota. A limit. Yeah. We don't. It was not possible to breed more than 150 males a year, and now it's impossible. It's a European or world market, and the most fashionable stallion in the world breed more than 1,000, 2,000, and some of them 3,000 mares a year. I think it's really stupid, but you can't control it because it's a world market. And I remember 2 years ago, I judged the DWP Fall Championship show in Belgium, and there was 200 foals to judge in one day, and 20% was from the same stallion. And I talked to my partner, the Dutch judge who judged with me, and I say, it's incredible, there are so many foals from this one. And he told me, it's normal, because it was the 1st of July, and he told me, today, this year, he bred more than 900 mares in Netherlands and Belgium, in Benelux. And when I come back home, I asked to the owner, how many mares he bred in France? 700. For the first year of breeding in France, and it's more than 1,500 mares a year. Hopefully, it's normal that 10 years later, this type of stallion will be on the top 10 of the world ranking, because there are so many, and because there are a few, not so many stallions, but a few stallions who breed so many mares. The average of mares by stallion goes down. I remember when we have a limit in France, every year for Les Pros, I wrote the top 100 most successful stallion in France. And the first one bred the maximum 150, but at the 100 place, the stallion bred around 30 to 40 mares. If you make the same ranking now, you have more stallions who breed more mares on the top 10, but then it goes down very quickly. And 10 years ago, the average for each stallion in France was 16 mares a year. 16. 20 years ago. Now it's less than 5. You have so many stallions who are not tested. You can see, if you have a stallion who breed 20 mares a year, it's around 10 foals born every year. If the stallion is exceptional, and in generation of 10 foal, you have 3 who won Grand Prix. Is exceptional, is really better than the others. But 3 horses who jump in Grand Prix, comparing with a stallion who breed 2,000 mares a year, they have 40, 50 Grand Prix horse every year. The percentage is not the same, but on the ranking, especially on the BWF ranking, they give only the money won or the point. If you have 200 horses who won, you are the best. If you have only 3, you are the last.
And that's why, back to what Emma was talking about in terms of the international cooperation or collaboration, that's why things like this are so important, because we can't stop stallions breeding that many. But at least if we have an accurate understanding of how many they're breeding and how many good ones, because the racing world are very good at this in terms of, you know, the numbers bred to the numbers that raced, the numbers that won. At least if we have that information, we can make decisions based on strike rate. Back to what you were saying, a horse with 10 offspring and 3 Grand Prix horses is more impressive than the horse who's 3 Grand Prix horses and bred several hundred.
I do have the same problem. In France, we have the final of our young horses, 4, 5, 6, and 7 in Fontainebleau every September, end of August, and you have sometimes some breeders say, "Oh, this stallion is fantastic. This year I have 50 young horses at the final." Yes, but you look at the number of mares bred? No. And if the stallion bred 1,000 mares a year, it's normal. He has more than 50 horses offspring at the final. And that's the information that the breeders all in all of Europe needs to know. That's the stallion owner don't want to give the information. There is I don't know if the word is correct, omerta, the silence about that, because the stallion, there is no information about the number of mares bred every year. There is no transparency about that, because it's not interesting for the stallion owner, the bigger one in Europe, to tell that, oh, I'm proud my stallion bred 3,000 mares a year, because some customers say, I don't want to use a stallion who breeds so much.
Yeah. And just maybe if people have questions, just in case I forget this, just the guys will take any questions that you have if you want to fill in those question cards and pass them to the guys. Just lastly then, I would like, if someone wants to try and defy the odds or go against and try to make a career as a stallion owner, I would like to know if you have any advice for them. And then I would also like, even though we covered this a few years ago, maybe your answer has changed, I would like to know your advice for a young breeder that's starting off also. So the stallion owner and the young breeder.
I think for on the future to be a stallion owner, it's very difficult, because the private people who have a very talented stallion, a young stallion, usually they give the promotion to the very big company to be sure that the stallion starts breeding many mares. Because if a private people have a good stallion, maybe he will breed 10, 20 mares. If you give the horse to promote him to the big company, he could breed 200 mares. And
so is the advice to give him to the big company?
Yeah. Maybe.
And then for the young breeder.
But I told you before, you have to start with a very, very, very talented mares. But sometimes, if you have not the money to buy the top filly, you can buy an old mare who already produce good horses. And now with the new technique of OPU XC, for example, everybody are not agree with this technique. But for example, with my mare Kachinamai, who is now 25 years old, I hesitate for many years to use the technique. Finally, my vet told me this technique was invited for your mare. Well, and finally, we have 2 years ago. I bring the mare in Italy, and then they are 2 years ago. We have 2 embryos, frozen embryo. Only one gave birth to the filly, top filly by Cornet. And this year, I bring the mare to Netherlands to do the same, and we have an embryo transplanted by Katoki. That's very interesting if you have a top mare, very old. I don't think so. It's a good technique for a young mare, because it's not without any risk. But it's a possibility, and if you look at the foal sold or the embryo sold in the auctions every week, many of them came from the same mare or same dam line, especially some Belgium dam line, very fashionable at the moment, and the world is really changing. The new technique, the new breeding technique, helps the breeder to improve the quality of their stock. But the type of breeder are not the same. It's not the people who use XC and Opu XC is not the same that the breeder, the old farmers that you find in Ireland or in Normandy. This technique is not for these people. The new people. There is a new type of breeder now. They are younger. Sometimes they have another profession, a job, and they have more money, and they can buy the best embryo on the auction or the best foal, and so on. And that's a new manner to breed. It's not. It's very different than on the past, and the new generation of breeders are on internet all the day. They look at the videos. They look at all the information that they can find on Facebook and so on. And for myself, Facebook is very important because it's the only way to make the promotion of my horses and my stallions. There is because nobody the magazine, the paper magazine, it's over, and you have only the internet to promote the stallion. And the bigger stallion owner are more active on the internet that I can do.
Perfect. Could you all please put your hands together for Bernard Le Courtois? Thank you very much, Bernard. Next up is a man in this room will not need any introduction. We have Irish international show jumper and Olympic medalist Cian O'Connor, who, if we're not mistaken, we were discussing this the other day, as of yesterday, represented Ireland on his 140th Nations Cup for Team Ireland, and I think if nothing else, that deserves a round of applause. Because we all, in this discipline, we're obviously focused heavily on the breeding side, and there'll be plenty of talks and debates about longevity, but that's quite something in a 23-year span. You made your Nations Cup debut at 19 years of age.
Yeah, thanks a million. I suppose things were a little bit different at the start in that there was mainly you did national shows, and then all the competitions you went to abroad were basically Nations Cups, so it was maybe a little bit easier back then.
I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't fancy even tackling one of them. So I think it's an incredible achievement. And you've had a lot of incredible horses. You've made a lot of incredible horses. You've sometimes taken horses that weren't obvious ones, and you've had incredible careers with them. Something that we talked about when we did the interview in Carlswood a few years ago was the difference between the good horses and the greats. And just for anyone that hasn't maybe heard that conversation, would you just talk on what you think the difference is between the good and the greats, even with respect to your own career? Like what has made those really great ones stand out, or what do you think is the difference?
I suppose typically when I'm looking at horses, I'm buying them a little bit older, maybe 7 years old normally, 8, 9 and so on. And it's very hard when you, nowadays I suppose it's more transparent, everything's on Instagram and videos are live streamed and so on. So you can do a lot of research when you're buying a horse. But when you go to get on that horse for the first time, usually one trial, maybe two, it's very hard to know the horse's brain. And really you can try a horse, especially continental horses, they have a lot of scope, they have big hind ends. And I would have been cut out a lot of the early stage of my career, this big flashy jump. And you get them into the ring and they can't bend their front legs and they don't jump clear rounds. And after a while you realise that, it's a clever horse that you want. And, when you come to the big occasion, the big days and the atmosphere of yesterday, and that's something that a horse has, you can't teach it. You can work on them and you can develop certain things, but like people, they either have intelligence or they don't.
That's thrown me.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
In your business, aside from your sporting career and success, you have developed a phenomenal business.
And something that is great is that you've chosen to do it in Ireland. You've competed around the world, you've had success around the world. You could have chosen anywhere to base, and I think it's really great, it's exciting, it's inspiring that you chose to develop Carlswood in Ireland and to the level that you've done it. And on the business side, obviously it's not just horses for your own career, it's horses for clients' careers, young riders that you train. I think before I read, and I think we touched on it previously, that you would look at up on 200 horses a year, probably if not more. Can you talk through what that process looks like? Like it might sound simple, but like, you know, how do you find these horses? But like what is, because you're a man that has a lot, like everything is very process driven and every detail is looked at in probably every aspect of, you know, your business and sport. What does your selection process look like in terms of finding these horses? But then could you also touch on the main things that you're really, really looking for, either for yourself or your client, but then also some of the frequent problems that you're seeing in the young horses around the world? I know that's 2 or 3 different things all in one, but just in terms of the process, the goal, and the challenges that you're seeing when you're searching for those horses.
Yeah, well, I think firstly, obviously, I'm very happy to be based in Ireland. I've always been a bit of a home bird, and I wanted to develop something here that could be unique. Myself and Ruth have 2 kids, and they're at school here, and they're into the ponies, and the whole idea was maybe that we would have something based. I always based here. I always felt when I went away, if I was in Eindhoven or Dusseldorf, that I'm just another number out there, where I can be a little bit of a big fish at home. And throughout my career, whether it was the original support I had from Tony O'Reilly when I started to ride, and later on I had horses from other owners. Charlie O'Reilly Highland got behind me for the Olympics in London with Blue Lloyd, and now currently working very closely with the Watchmans and the Magners. So it's always been good for me to be home based, and it's something that I'm very proud of. In relation to the success, a lot of the success is due to the team around me. You mentioned getting a little emotional earlier on here. It's the same when you think back on some of those great horses or some of those great days. All the people who helped make it happen, from the background team. Ross Mulholland is with me nearly 14 years. Some of the staff are there 8 or 9 plus years, and we've had people there, you know, as long or more. So it's all those people that keep the whole thing rolling. At the moment, Michael Kelly, who is a captain in the Irish Army, works for us, and his main job is looking at horses. And so even today there was a horse jumping in Belgium, and during the class he wanted me to look at it. So I had to stop and make 5 minutes for that, watch the video, and we've organised a vet check and a trial of that horse next week. It's a horse we've been following that has improved. And so we're studying videos every week, studying results, because results matter. And he would come to me every Monday with a sheet of horses to look into. And I'd say, I know that one, or I don't like that one, or that one won't be for sale, and so on. And so that process then evolves, that I would then contact the owners, try to find out prices, try to arrange trials in those horses. But it could be up on, maybe we would look at maybe double that figure now, 500 horses a year, and maybe we're only buying 50. So it comes from, I suppose, him researching them, to following the horses, keeping an eye on them, seeing if they're for sale, and then seeing is the price fit what we want to do, and then eventually going and having a ride on the horses, seeing what we think, and maybe you bring the vet and the horse doesn't pass and you're back to square one again.
Now, it must be only a recent thing now that you've started worrying about if a horse is for sale or not now. I can't imagine that if you really want a horse, I'd say you're a determined sort now. I don't think...
Oh, listen, it depends. I mean, we're buying horses to trade as well. We're buying horses to sell, and so then the price matters. If you see that your horse is definitely for the next, you know, big time stuff, then you can afford to give a little bit more. But it does matter, I mean, because you're obviously trying to sell the horse for profit, and we have business to run, and costs have to be kept in check as well.
And I think what was interesting the last time we touched on this topic was, because you're looking at so many horses, and you might be trying a small percentage, but you're still trying, you know, a lot of horses, because sure. it's a big business and there's several people to keep equipped. But are there common themes that you're still seeing kind of year after year when you're going to try these horses, that they're not meeting your requirements, that the videos might look great and the results look great, but when you're going there, like that, it's the same kind of stumbling blocks.
Yeah, sometimes a horse might have less blood than you would have thought. And that's a big no-no. If you get up on him and he's very heavy, he's like a tractor to get moving, or he's playing, or you have to kick him across the back pole. Those kind of horses aren't commercial because nobody wants to be, you won't win a class on them. And the lesser riders or the younger riders aren't going to be able to get them over the big fences. So horse has to have blood. And I like to think that all my horses, when I'm riding a big course, I only want to worry about the vertical or the first pole of the oxer. The second pole is the horse's problem. And that's scope and blood. And if I can ride a course and I'm not worried about the back rail, then I know I'm on the right animal.
Because I think something that really surprised me when we touched on it the last time, and it's something that maybe I wouldn't have thought of, especially at the level that you're dealing, is how many horses you were saying are unsound when you they're not sound when you go to try them or ride them or see them going by you.
Yeah, I think it's incredible as well how the sport has taken off even since we last spoke. I mean, I used to say every 3 to 5 years you have to look at your business model and be prepared to tweak it and see. I mean, every 18 months this sport is booming, you know, and a lot of it is probably due to Jan Tops and the Global Champions Tour and bringing the sport worldwide. There's increased participation. There's far more 5-star shows. There's far more people out there with a big checkbook to buy horses, and everybody's on the receiving end of that. There's everyone, rising tide lifts all boats, and that's helped everybody. But I think actually what's interesting about the soundness, people I find the last little while are even, they can't find horses, that they're slightly more forgiving. And I hear the American vets saying that as well, that before people would say definitely not touching it. Now because they can't find the horse at all, they're starting to say, well, could we live with 8 out of 10?
And when you're going out, a lot of the time you probably buy horses for yourself, am I right? And then it's later as you develop them, then it's deemed if they're suitable for clients or not. Like, are you first trying to find horses good enough for yourself, or is it generally resale that's in mind, or does it have to be all encompassing?
No, I'll just find a nice horse. I'm lucky I have 2 good guys that ride for me at Carlswood now as well, and so I'm looking to have enough horses for them to develop. If I have good riders, I want to have nice horses under them, and looking for a quality young horse, typically with a good mind, something that I can sell if it's not just good enough. So again, starting out when I was, 20 years ago, I wanted to buy anything with a jump regardless of rideability. So I'd be more critical on rideability now. Like if it really doesn't change lead or it's very, very wooden, I'd kind of pass it by, because if it doesn't make the grade, it's hard to sell. I've had that discussion a lot with a pal of mine, Ken Farrington, in America, and he's a little bit different. He buys speedy ones and very athletic ones, and his strike rate is fantastic, the amount of horse that he brings through to the top level. And I just said, for my market, I think Shane Sweetnam does it particularly well, where he buys horses, he jumps them in big classes, and he's prepared to trade them on. Except James Cancruz, he tells me. Everything else is for sale.
And you mentioned about, every few years looking at your business model. One thing that you dabbled in for a while, and I think you've probably moved away from, is the breeding side of the game. From the few years that you were involved in it, any kind of major takeaways or learnings?
Well, obviously, everyone in this room, when you talk to breeders, everyone's so passionate about it, and you can't be half in or half out. And I'm so busy with everything that I'm trying to do, I suppose I didn't have enough attention to give it. And it's something that I would have an interest in and something that I'd like to do, but I'd like to do it properly. And I'm not getting any younger. I prefer to go out and buy the best 6, the best 7-year-old or whatever that I could find. And I know, that's how he is. That's how his x-rays are. That's how he jumps. Without breeders, we're nothing. We need breeders, and we also spoke before about how to bridge the disconnect between breeders and top riders, and that's something that needs to be explored and something I'd be very happy to be a part of. But right now, I suppose at this stage of my career, it's not something that is quick enough, I suppose, and I'm more than happy to buy from the breeders and give them a good price for their product.
I suppose that the priority, and especially with the upcoming Olympics in mind, and maybe the next one,
sure,
is, and I think you said recently, you probably have moved away from buying those younger horses as well. That are you more focused now on horses that are kind of ready to go into the program?
Yeah, I think you have to be flexible. I mean, I'd buy a 4-year-old or I'd buy a 15-year-old. If I thought I could have success with it or trade it, it doesn't have to be specific. And I think that's important. Like the year before last, Ireland had to go to the World Championships to qualify for the Olympic Games. And I remember thinking it was a bit soon for Kilkenny coming back to work. And we bought a 14-year-old horse. And he helped the team qualify at the World Championships, and actually he helped Team Israel qualify for the Olympic Games last week with his new rider as well. So I think you have to be flexible, not just say I'll only buy or trade in this bracket. You've got to be able to do everything.
And one thing that we've, let's say, debated before, and we have differing opinions on it, and I think that's also important. With any space, we don't all have to have the same approach or the same outlook on life or the same preference on horses. But one thing where we've had a bit of a debate on is the area around name changes.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something else. Name changes, yeah.
So, as breeders, we can get very passionate about the names that we give horses. There's been a good number of horses that you've bought in recent years that have been renamed. And I thought this could be a nice opportunity to actually get your perspective on it rather than, obviously, my biased view.
Sure. No, I think it's good, and I think there's always going to be different opinions on it. For me personally, I don't change that many names of horses. Some owners like to change them more than others. The mare I jumped yesterday, Eve Dooley, but I was on a radio interview the other day with Ruby Walsh, and he couldn't even pronounce the Dooley part, and that's straightforward. Now, if you go to some of the Belgian names, Van de Baja, Goggly-Goop, people cannot get their head around it at all. And if it's on RTE, and you think back to the old days, you had Rock Barton, you had Milton, you had one-word names. It was simple to follow. And the army all their life called horses after townlands. Some owners like to do the same. So, I don't know, I think it needs to be simple. And while the breeder has to get bang for his buck, we all have an onus to promote the sport. And if you can't associate with the horse with those big, long-winded names, you're doing the sport an injustice.
Now, I know you're a little tight on the time front, so I'm actually going to finish with the final two questions that we'll probably have touched on before, but again, people's perspectives change. I finish every interview that I do usually with advice for a young breeder, but what I've tried to do this evening is actually, as well as the advice for the young breeder, try and get the advice for the young person in their space. So whether it was someone pursuing an academic career in horses or a stallion owner, I'd like to get your advice on the advice for a young breeder, and I'd also like to get your advice on the young rider that's starting out, that ambitious young rider that wants to have 140 Nations Cups under their belt in 20 years' time.
Well, I suppose I wouldn't be qualified to advise any breeder because I think some people talk outside their box and it's not my expertise. But I think obviously you have to try and breed something that you can sell. And I think that's important. And obviously having good mares are important. To breed a superstar is something else, but it has to be a good commercial horse that can be sold. And as I spoke on earlier on, the amount of money that's come into the game, what these horses are worth, rideable horses that can jump decent-sized fences, they don't have to be superstars, are worth a lot of money. And if you can breed a good commercial horse, like sometimes an amateur Grand Prix horse is worth far more money than a difficult 160 horse. In terms of for a young rider, it's tough. I wouldn't like to be starting it again. I think I came into it at a good time. I had many good breaks, had many good horses along the way. I feel very lucky to have the career I have had. It's so incredible tonight to see the parades at the main arena there with the ponies, the juniors, the young riders, and like the talk of Europe, talk of the world in terms of how well the youth are doing, and so the future looks really, really bright. And I suppose the thing is for those young riders is to keep their head, to stay out of the pub, to work hard and to find horses. And many of them come through, they're kind of superstars in their own house or in their own village when they're 16, 17, 18, and it doesn't come through, and it's diligence and it's hard work, it's learning how to lose and to take the knocks, because there's far more bad days than good, and you have to be resilient and be able to plough through them.
Well, look, thank you very much. And I know you had different commitments and earlier with clients, and you have different commitments tonight, but thank you very much for giving us your time. A round of applause for Cian
Thank you.
O'Connor.
Thanks very much, Mike.
See you later. Now for the man who told me I really don't want to do it, and he still got on that plane, and he still came over. I would like to welcome Alan Waldman to the stage. If we give him a round of applause. So obviously this is the benefit of this. It's to be an educational conversation for breeders, but similarly to the start of the conversation about friendship, you meet a lot of special people if you travel the world in the horse world, and you develop some great relationships, no more than all the people that have helped me here today. But Alan is one of those people, and when you ask someone to come and speak, and two things that they probably hate most in life are public speaking and traveling, and they fly to Dublin to speak at an event. I'm very, very grateful, and not just for me, but for everyone who's sitting here, because you're a name that a lot of people hear, and a lot of people probably haven't met, especially in Ireland, because it can be hard to get you on a plane. And it can sometimes be hard to get Irish people on a plane the other way. So I'm very, very grateful, because you have had success in lots of different aspects of your life. A rider, a breeder, as an owner, in terms of auctions. You've put some incredible horses through your hands, and for me, you've kind of seen all aspects of the sport. And I think it's 25 years or so you took a notion. Did you take a break from university and you decided to go on a holiday or a trip over to Holland, and you haven't left yet?
It was not originally the plan that I would live in Europe, but I took a year break from school. I was planning to be a lawyer, and met a girl and stayed in Holland. And it was, I'm very happy I did it. It was a good decision, and Holland's been great to me, so I'm happy.
And when we did an interview a few years ago in your home at the time in Putin, and we talked about different mentors that you had in your career, and a lot of the ones we focused on were maybe on the sports side and in your riding career, and the ones who really gave you that foundation in the sport. But I suppose in terms of your time in Holland, you spent a lot of time with a breeder and dealer, I guess, Egbert Schep. Would you talk a little bit about your experience there and what you learned from him? And was that really when the dealing interest or the dealing side of your business developed?
I think the main thing that happened for me at that time is it was before I moved in 2000, and it was the internet was just starting, but most of the information that I was able to get on stallions was through reading books and magazines. And at that time, Voltaire was very popular. Nimidor, a lot of stallions like this. So when I came to Holland, I was able to see there were a lot of young horse classes, and that's something that we didn't have in America. So there were 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6 and 7-year-old classes, and I could see many, many horses from certain pedigrees and bloodlines, and that's something that always interests me. So I was able to sort of form my own opinions and, see, because I had much more information, and I could judge for myself what I was watching. So I think that was something that made a big difference for me.
And was that side of your business, was it something that you consciously sought out, the dealing side, or did it develop kind of by accident? Or?
It developed by necessity. I hate selling horses still to this day. I hate when people come try horses because they always want to find the hole in the horse or see what the horse can't do, and that's not what I like to develop horses and bring out the best in them. But it's an expensive sport, and I was never able to find the balance myself in being able to do the top level and keep the best horses, which is what I wanted to do. So I just made a decision that it was easier at that point. I didn't think it would be forever. I thought I would end up riding again, and it was sort of a means to an end, but it just sort of, before I knew it, I'm getting older, and it hasn't happened again. So,
except now you're back on a horse.
In the last weeks, I'm back on a horse again out of necessity. So.
Similarly to Cian, you, even when I spend time in your company, it's actually scary the number of calls, messages, videos that you're being sent, even without necessarily you seeking out horses for your business. You're being sent a large volume, and there's so many messages and calls between people trying to sell horses or looking for horses. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, again back to the holes, when people are coming looking at horses and finding the holes, it's a comment you've made before, because you're seeing so many horses, you find the holes in stallions and pedigrees quicker than the average breeder would, because usually we use a stallion and we might use it once or twice, and after twice we think, okay, that's enough, and we move on to something else. Are there consistent problems that you're seeing, because you're buying from foals to horses that are probably ready to go and jump the Grand Prix, like you've bought and dealt in all aspects of it. Are you seeing consistent problems in, like, on the sports side or the dealing side of horses that you're buying, trying, looking at?
Well, I don't know if there's consistent problems, but the more information that you have on something, then the easier it is to pick up on the positive and the negative aspects. I know, like, there were years, I think in around 2010, that I bred 11 mares with Berlin, and then the next year I bred the same 11 mares with Vigo Darceau. And if I compare the horses back, I got really different results from breeding with those two stallions. And I think, you really saw you were able to watch on 11 foals from each stallion with the same mares back. You started to see a lot of commonalities and things. So I think there's been years as well in the past that I went and bought many foals from certain stallions that were unknown, and then some of them I turned out to, I really like those stallions in the future, and others I never want to touch, the young horses again. So I think, like I said, information is great, but I think in the end of the day you have to follow your own gut, and because the more information you have, the harder your decisions will become as well.
And from you're trying to run a sports stable all the time as well. What are the greatest challenges facing you on that side of things?
I think the greatest challenge, I think now, we've talked with Cian, who runs a top sports stable, and we talked with top breeders tonight. I think breeding good horses is getting easier and easier. I think, especially through all the auctions, through all the different techniques, I think there's more good horses than there's ever been before. But I think it's turning into a management issue and a riding issue. So for me and my company, the biggest challenges are developing the horses in the right way, giving the horses time. I think what's also difficult having a company where you develop horses is that not every horse is on the same schedule, where they fit into a 4-year-old class or a 6-year-old class. Some horses take till they're 10 years old to develop. When you start speaking about, I don't really know any stallion that's jumped 160 or that's been a top horse that doesn't give top horses back. But the issue is in what period of time. I remember I was the first person to breed with Berlin, and people were very negative about him at the beginning, and later everybody was extremely positive, and people were very excited about Mr. Blue at one point. But when he got a second breeding chance, then the young horses didn't seem as good until they got older. So, and same thing with Cannon now, or Cornetto Belinsky. They didn't breed so much. They gave a lot of good horses, and then when people have gone back to use them, they're not point jumpers at 4 and 5 years old necessarily. So then I think people get disappointed. But I think if you give them time, that they turn out to bring a lot of good horses again.
And actually, the very first time that we met, one of the first things out of your mouth was, "Oh, you're from Ireland." Both myself and Alan Robertson were at Floris Van Lukens, and when you heard we were from Ireland, one of your first questions was, "Do you know where I can get any good Louis dams?" And it just really struck me, because it was a stallion that had probably been in the early years, had probably been that bit underrated as well, but he was one that you supported quite early on, and you've had some great success with some of his homebreds. Who do you see at the moment being those underrated stallions that you've been quite impressed with, the horses that you're seeing either through the U-Horse auction, through your own breeding program, through your own sports stable? Are there... Who's the new Louis Dam? The underrated with the striker.
I think most stallions are underrated at the moment, because I think what's scary with current breeding is everyone uses the same horses. I mean, if you try to look for different blood, it's very difficult. I mean, every pedigree has Cornetta Belinsky or Diamant of some sort, whether it's through Emerald or, I mean, the same pedigree is coming in every direction. So, and I think people just follow the path of a lot of people are like sheep. They just follow what one person says is good. I sold a foal last year, a Chaplain from Lizzie Mary. He had won the World Cup finals that year, and I think he's won 5 or 6, 5-star Grand Prix. And this was a top breeder, and they said to me, "Who's Chaplain?" So for me, that was very strange. But I think there's a lot of really good stallions. You see a stallion like Karen Bowl. I don't think he's had many chances in his life. Or there's a stallion jumping this week here from Holland, Ipstar. His entire life, he's been a winner. He won as a 4-year-old, 5-year-old. I mean, he's really a top competitor, but I don't think he breeds very much. I'd be surprised if he bred 20 mares a year. So are they underrated or just underused? I think that's... people, because things are so expensive, a lot of people start to breed commercially, and it's not always necessarily the right choice.
Yeah, and one thing that has quite interested me in your approach, like, you definitely are an individual, and you do things your own way. It's in your breeding program, you're not afraid to experiment, and it's actually something. Yourself and Bernard are actually two of the few breeders that I've met traveling around in the past 10 years that have really tried to use thoroughbred in your jumping breeding programs. Will you give me your thoughts on that? Like, why when you've had probably horses from every decent family and dam line and pedigree at this stage, but why do you feel that's still important or something that interests you?
Well, I didn't grow up in a horse family, and my dad is a doctor. He made a good living, but my parents were very supportive of my brother and I, but they would never do anything that they couldn't afford or past their means. So my dad never really spent a lot of money on horses. So I grew up riding thoroughbreds, and I love them. They were smart. They were intelligent. I think they were probably different in the past. I remember watching Hand and Glove jump at the Oaks when I was like 10 years old, and he was jumping 160 classes. So I think thoroughbreds, or I think it could be an Anglo-Arab, it could be a trotter, like what Japaloop has as a mother, or Gallowbay behind, but I think we need a different gene pool. I even have one breeding line that has Connemara pony behind it. So I think we need more diversity in the gene pool. I think that's important. And I think where the sport is going today, like you touched, I haven't ridden in many years. I started riding again, and I'm able to sit on a lot of horses with no spurs, that have a nice mouth, good rideability, and those are things I never would have thought of before, but I think in the direction where the sport is going, it's important. I think we need intelligence, we need careful blood horses, so I think that when you add in blood, whether that's an Anglo-Arab or a trotter or a thoroughbred, I think it brings something different to the gene pool, and I think it's very important.
And then in terms of, I suppose, with something that's already been touched on tonight is new techniques that are available, or reasonably new techniques in terms of ICSI and OPU. But what always interests me, you're not afraid to go back into the past to try and get what you want, but you're also not afraid to take on and use the new technologies. But what has been interesting is actually hearing your first-hand experience. You've probably done quite a bit of OPU or ICSI, and it hasn't been all positive for you.
No, I want to explain why I've done it. I've done it because I live near the University of Utrecht. I'm very good friends with one or two of the vets there, and they gave me an opportunity where sort of in an experimental program, where if I brought the mares every Monday morning, which required a lot of staff, a lot of traveling, that I got a very good deal to do it. And so it gave me an opportunity to use, stallions that I had one straw of, or that I wanted to, some older mares get more babies from. I'm really on the fence with it. I think if you have a successful, well, maybe I should say this. I also, when I started riding years ago, I was lucky, and Nelson Pessoa had started a breeding program with somebody in America in the 80s or late 70s, 80s, where they bred Quickstar and they bred some very good horses. And that was all embryo transfers. So already early in my career, when I was 12 and 13, I was riding horses that were embryo transfers. So I had a lot of experience with that, and it was very positive. When I moved to Europe in 2000, and I talked about embryo, I came over here with a very good mare that I jumped in Zangerzide. As a 7-year-old, she was from an embryo family, and nobody was really doing it here. It was really, and I didn't understand it because I had very positive experiences with embryos, and still to this day, I really believe in embryos. I think ICSI is a very good technique as well, but it's really taking out the natural selection. So I think that if you have a successful, good baby, it's as good as any other baby. But I think getting there is a long way. And I think if I look at my foals this year, I have a lot that are too small. I have a lot that they're not good enough. The good ones, I have great ICSI foals, but I think that it's a hard process. I don't think I think a lot of breeders want mares. I think when you do ICSI, you have a much higher percentage of having stallions. I think that if they're weak and not as strong, I think is a bigger percentage. Again, I think you have a lot that are good as well, but I think that it's not so simple.
Yeah, and even from different conversations that we've had over the past few years, even before you get that foal on the ground, you seem to have lost a much higher percentage of your ICSI embryos during the pregnancy than the...
Oh, definitely. I think when most of the stallion owners that you need to tell them by October 15th, if your mare is still pregnant, to pay the stud fee. And I don't usually pick up a mare from the university till they're like 90 days, that they've checked them a couple times. And with the normal pregnancies and the normal embryo transfers, if they have a heartbeat at 25 or 30 days, I'm 99% that unless something goes wrong, that I'm good. But with the ICSI, I have many, many, many mares past 100 days that are empty, and it's very disappointing. Every year.
And it's just sometimes I think it's important to have conversations about realities. And different people have different experiences, of course, but it's just to get your perspective on it, because usually what we see is people's highlight reels on social media and all the embryos that they got and all the ones that have been successful and the ICSI foal that makes a really big price. But I just think it's important to see both sides of the picture. And just to wrap up, I'm conscious that we're getting tight on time, and I want an opportunity to invite all the speakers back on stage in a moment. So any final questions, if you could give them to Claire or Amy, please, just so that I have time to have a look through and field them to our speakers. To finish, I would like to hear your advice for a young breeder, but also I would like to hear your advice for someone that wanted to develop a dealing aspect to their business as well. Like how would you advise those two people? They don't have to be mutually exclusive, but how would you advise those two people?
I think for a breeder, I think it's important to talk with a lot of people, and it's very helpful if you start with proven families. But I don't think that's the only way to go. I know that I think sometimes out of the box, but I don't come from a horse family, and I think that what's important is that you breed with horses you like. You like the mother, you like the father. I know I left America when I was 24, 25 years old, And, you know, my brother and I looked nothing alike at that point, and now we look like twins. And I see a lot of my friends whose, you know, their parents were big and fat and they were skinny, and now they look just like their mom or their dad. So I think with the breeding, a lot of it is common sense. And I think the better families make it definitely easier for people that are new to the sport, or it's an easier way of going, but I think that it doesn't always need to go that way. And I think if you have, if you start with a good athlete and you match up their pros and their cons, I think you can be very successful, and you can build your own breeding lines as well. So I think there's a lot of routes you can go. As far as the young professional, I think the sport, the whole industry is really changing, and I think a lot of people have skills behind a computer or with their telephone, and I think that's very important, but I think never lose track of all. I think the more well-rounded you are and the better skill set you have will help you, because this is not an easy industry. And I think that we're really approaching a stage where we're going to have more good horses than we have horsemen. So I think that it's really important that if you ask someone to do something, that you're always capable of doing it yourself, and that you're able to do all aspects of the horse sport, not just one thing.
Super. Can you please put your hands together for Alan Waldman? So if you hang on there. Could I ask Emma and Bernard to join us back on stage for a few minutes, please? So Alan is very, very interested in thoroughbred stallions who have jumped Grand Prix, similar to Bernard's approach, that's the most interesting ones that have. Some of you will have seen in the media last year that Road to Happiness, the thoroughbred stallion who had stood in Ireland, ended up going to Alan's and onto a lady in the US, I believe. But Alan had him back under saddle and jumping and assessing. So first, actually, you might just talk about that, and then what Alan had said to Bernard quietly there is, I want to know about Laudanum. You might just talk about him as a horse and what he brought to the table. So actually, Alan, if you start with your experience of Road to Happiness, because it's one that a lot of people will be familiar with, what he was like in your sports stable, and then we'll go on to Bernard to talk about Laudanum and what he was like and what he brought in terms of his offspring. Please. And I'll be having a read through these.
With Road to Happiness, I don't understand how he was let out of Ireland. A lot of people always are saying they want different blood and thoroughbreds, but they never use them. So I bought Road to Happiness just out of luck. A friend called me and said we had the opportunity to buy him. I didn't really know what we would be getting, but I liked the pedigree. And when he showed up, he was uphill. If you talk about eyes, he was magnificent. He was beautiful, sort of like Laudanum's always had beautiful eyes, and he had a bit that same soft, intelligent look. And an incredible gallop and balance and mouth. He jumped in a super shape. He really backed up at the jumps where a lot of thoroughbreds jump forward. He really could back up. I don't know what scope he had, but we could jump him. You know, he was 17, 18 years old, around 120 courses, and he jumped beautifully. So I really believe he can give good show jumpers. But I don't know what he bred here, but I really believe in it.
But after handing glove, I look on the American market to find a new one, and but sadly, all the American riders stopped to ride thoroughbred, and there is not any thoroughbred in Grand Prix for 10 years in America, and especially stallions. And at the moment, it's impossible to find a new stallion, a new thoroughbred stallion who jump Grand Prix. If there is one on the market, I try to buy him, but. But
the interesting thing about Hand and Glove was he was by best turn, I think, right, and out of a buck passer mother. He had really a pedigree of not only was he a good sport horse himself, but he had a pedigree where I think turn 2 in my experience, having not knowing about pedigrees, but with good thoroughbreds that I had in the past, I always saw turn 2 in there. So, and then at that time also a lot of from Buckpasser. So he not only was he a good individual, but as far as on paper with blood, I think that those genetics really bred jumpers as well.
Maybe it's difficult to find good thoroughbred to cross with a sports mare because the conformation of the thoroughbred is not the same now as that it was 35 or 45 years ago. Now, it's in the past, it's difficult to say because some people say it's better to use thoroughbred who won in hurdle racing. Some say no, it's better to use a thoroughbred who won in flat racing. Some say it's better to use a miler because you have a very strong bottom, and the others say no, it's better to use a stayer because he has a big heart and best balance and there is no recipe, I think.
What I remember, I never saw Laudonomies before my time, but Hand and Glove looked like a warm blood. What I remember, yes. He was not really a thoroughbred model or a bigger thoroughbred.
Some people didn't want to use him because he was too tall and too heavy. And it was the opposite for Laudanum. Laudanum was a small chestnut with white leg, a little bit open in the front, and 1 meter 1.60 at the weather. And some people say it's a rabbit. I don't want to use Laudanum. And at the beginning, he bred. When I bought Laudanum, he bred less than 10 mares a year, and it was incredible. And Pierre Durand told me if I had at the same time Laudanum and Japlou, I choose Laudanum to go to the Olympic, not Japlou, because his mind was fantastic. And Laudanum was the first Grand Prix horse of Pierre Durand. Pierre Durand was 19 years old when he started to ride Laudanum. And Laudanum gained his first 5-star Grand Prix at 7 years old. And he won Puissance, he won Nations Cup, and he was pre-selected for the Olympic in Montreal. And Pierre said this horse I was too young to ride this top quality horse because I have no experience. I did nothing very good for the horse at this time, but the horse himself was an incredible horse. And in the offspring, in the offspring of Laudanum, he produced he bred just a few mares, around the best year 60 mares a year. It's very few, but he produced every year top quality Grand Prix horse. Many amateur 1.40 45 Grand Prix in France because they are very easy to ride, very good balance, and very strong in their head. And when he crossed the top mares, he produced high level 1.60 It was an incredible horse. But when the people look at him, he was a small chestnut thoroughbred, as usual.
I'm going to try and get through a mix of questions here. It mightn't be possible to get through them all. I'm going to start with you, Emma. The question is, what resources, be it books or academic papers, etc., would you recommend to a breeder interested in furthering their knowledge on the genetic side of breeding and their understanding?
That's a really good question. I wouldn't recommend you to go into the academic papers firsthand, but most researchers today also write about their findings in popular scientific magazines, or you can find them in podcasts or other more accessible media. And books are almost not written anymore, sadly, when we're in the library. I love libraries. But I think the most accessible way is just if there's anything in particular you're interested in, so you just Google it. It's easy accessible. And why not ask if there is a researcher that has found out something that you're interested in, contact them. They love to speak to people, just as I think you usually talk in your podcast about breeders love to share their knowledge with other breeders. Researchers do too. So if there's anything in particular you're interested in, contact them.
And are there any books, are there any particular books that are accessible to kind of someone starting off? I know you're saying about the research papers, it's probably too heavy to jump into straight away, but are there any books, either genetics or equine specific, that you think are quite useful or are worth noting?
Well, when it comes to basic genetics, I usually recommend people to look into like college material, what they teach in colleges, because it's a good starting point, like basic genetics. I'm not aware of any good international books. There probably are ones, but most of it is online now, so you can find it online. Yeah, that's just the way it is. But the basic knowledge is usually on a college level.
And I know it's not quite in-depth genetics, but what I've found is sometimes there has been a lot more research done on the thoroughbred side of things, and they're harder to find, but still if you look online you will find some thoroughbred books on like thoroughbred breeding theories and things like that that kind of give a little bit of maybe a taster, because often the thoroughbreds have been more studied than the sport horses as well.
And I should also say, speaking about the World Breeding Federation, they just started to do webinar series on a really nice level, and it's really available for everyone, and they are also recorded and available afterwards. So this just started this spring, but there are some interesting webinars there already that you can look into.
One for Alan. What are the different traits, are there different traits that you look for if you were looking for a horse for the American market versus the European market?
I think maybe in the past, but I think now not really. I think the sport has changed. I think when I moved here 20 years ago, in America, everything was really expensive, and in Europe, everything was much more, you had a much bigger national level where everybody could compete, and the reason all the horses were sold was because people in a country like in Holland where I was, or Belgium, they were small countries and there were only a couple people that got the opportunities to compete at the highest level. So all the horses ended up being sold. But from the time where they've started all the 2- and 3-star competitions, it's really changed in Europe, where it's majority amateur riders or people with money that are doing the sport. So I think it's a high percentage of amateur horses. So I think those horses that used to go to America have a job here now. So it's quite similar.
I think by the looks of these questions, we could have triggered a thoroughbred thought, or a thoroughbred conversation that might go on all night. But maybe just briefly, I want to touch on a few of them. Bernard, in your opinion, are there thoroughbred stallions or sport horse stallions with a high percentage of thoroughbred? And I think you might have thoughts on this as well. So what thoroughbred stallions or sport horse stallions with a lot of thoroughbred do you think can still be influential today or that are interesting today?
It depends. If you want to breed eventers, you have to use thoroughbred. You have to use offspring who have a lot of blood. Sometimes the blood comes from the father, sometimes comes from the mother. For example, if you look at the young horse final in eventing, to win at 4, 5, or 6, it's easy. You don't need a horse with a lot of blood. A show jumper who have a good movement can win everything. And but if your goal is to breed 4-star CCI, you have to use foal with more blood. Yes, in France we are lucky. We are lucky because in our bloodline we have a specific breed, there is no everywhere, it's the French Anglo-Arab. And the French Anglo-Arab is not a mix between show Arabian and bad thoroughbred. It's a real breed with a native breed crossed with Arabian for racing and good thoroughbred. And they create 300 years ago the breed French Anglo-Arab. And for example, in my stud farm, I have many dam line who come from Anglo-Arab mare at 4th or 5th generation now. But the blood still is in the gene of the horse. And if you cross, for example, a stallion half-bred like my Lord Carthago, Diamant Semilly, with the mare who has 80% of thoroughbred, you can produce a good eventer, because to produce an eventer, the horse must be a good jumper, a good mover, and with blood. If you produce, your goal is to produce show jumper, the blood is important, but not so important. You don't need 100% blood in a show jumper, but the risk is the thoroughbred are very far away on the pedigree. Now, if you look at a pedigree of the show jumper, the thoroughbred is at the 5th or 6th generation. You can see it on the pedigree, and maybe it could be a problem for the next generation, and specifically because the thoroughbred bring some qualities, hard quality, and I don't know the term in French. We say tissu, but it's the peel and so on, and the quality of the tendon and so on, but also the new gene, because our problem now and the next problem in Europe or in the world, it will be the consanguinity, the line breeding, and I think. There is, for example, in France, the stud book 20 years ago, the stud book was closed. But we have the trotter, we have the thoroughbred, and we have the Anglo-Arab to bring new gene. But then we open the stud book and we use all the stallion from Netherlands, from Germany, from Belgium, from everywhere, to do like everybody, because the people want to be free and to cross with any stallion. But now we use the same stallions as the Belgians, the Dutch, the American, and the German. And I look at the catalog this week for the final of the 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. It was the same stallions that we have in Fontainebleau in France. Emerald, Cornetto Bolonski, Diamant Semilly, and so on, and Tangelo, and what to do with the next generation to cross if everybody uses the same line. Maybe the thoroughbred could be a solution again.
I'd like to add one thing, if it's okay. I think there is really an interesting thoroughbred. I think Gemini, the clone of Gem Twist, I think breeders have an opportunity now to, and maybe not everybody believes in cloning and the process, but I think Gemini is extremely interesting. If I look at my young horses, the best generations, the best horses I have from generation 3 and 4 years old are all from Gemini mothers. I really, really believe in it. So maybe not the direct outcross. You might get something too small, but one generation further, it's for breeders who think a bit further, it's extremely interesting.
And this is a question that was directed at all, so it's whoever wants to take it first. And it's probably relevant to a lot of people that are in the room, because there are a handful of larger breeders here, but there are a lot of breeders who are small, maybe with 1, 2, 3 mares, and the question is, what's the business model that's most realistic for the small breeder, is the first part of the question.
I can start. I think it's important to, it depends what your breeding goal is, but I think when I moved to Europe, a lot of people they bred because they liked having horses, and they just enjoyed the process of having a foal every year. But I think as it's become more and more expensive, people want to earn money with it, or at least not lose money. So I think try to breed commercially is important for breeders, that they get their, that they are able, that it doesn't cost them money. So I think that's to a lot of people important.
Every year, many customers call me to ask advices to cross, to choose a stallion, and my first question is, what is your goal? What is the goal to produce the foal? If many of my customers said, I have a mare that I use for jumping amateur Grand Prix. I want to improve the quality of my mare, size, scope, and so on. But it's a horse for the family. It's not the same choice that if you want to produce a foal to sell immediately at the international auction, because if you want to sell the foal to get the money immediately, you have to use one of the most fashionable stallion in the world. If you want to just improve your mare, you have to use a young stallion, unknown, but with a good quality, nice conformation, nice pedigree, and maybe you will make the good choice, maybe not. It depends what will be on what becomes a stallion later. And you can use a stallion older who have a very good production, but that's all the breeder forgot because it's not fashionable anymore. But it's not for that. It is not still a good stallion, but the fashion is away. And it depends really that the breeder want to breed, want to do with the production.
I'm conscious that different people have a long way to travel and get to car parks and that sort of thing. So I'm going to wrap it up on the next question. I know there are some specific questions that maybe if some of the guys are happy to stay on for a few minutes, to those who have a burning question that they want to get answered, because there's actually too many to get through, and we have a lot of people to get home. I'm going to give a question to all because there's a few questions here have come up around embryo transfer and ICSI. So I'm going to give a closing question that I'd like each of you to give your opinion on. And it is about the effect of the recipient mare on embryos and the effect that they have. So we'll take a two-part question. The type of recipient mare you would prefer when you have a choice, and then what effect do you feel that they have on the foal that they raise?
For me, ideally, in a recipient mare, I'd like a mare who's had one foal and bigger than 16 one hands, because I find with smaller mares, and if it's a first foal, I have a higher percentage of a smaller foal. As far as temperament, characteristics, I don't think it matters. What mare? I've had some really awful embryo mares, and the foals were really like their parents. But I do think nutrition-wise, it is very important that they're healthy, that they give good milk, and that they're good mothers to the babies. But as far as temperament, in my experience, I haven't seen a different, even if the mare was awful, and that the foal took on those characteristics.
Emma?
It is really interesting what you mentioned, because you have so much practical experience from that side. Because what I would say is that temperaments does matter, and that it has been scientifically proven from different species of animals that the maternal imprinting is really important when it comes to temperament. Not perhaps for rideability and the hand, but attitude towards humans, reaction to fearfulness, stress, that it affects the offspring, even if there are no biological connections between the mother and the foal. So I think it's really important that you choose a mare that's in type and size, looking more or less the same as the donor mare, so it's not a much bigger or much smaller mare. And temperament-wise, not only because it does affect the offspring, not always, obviously, but you should handle that mare. You should have her at home. It's in your breeding program, so temperament's really important as well. Yep.
Even for self-preservation.
I think there is also another. If the mare bring the foal, have the foal by herself, she will breed again the next breeding season, and she will go to the vet. You have to
it's like manage a bit
to
interact
to manage the mare and the foal. If you have a foal by embryo transfer with a recipient mare, the mare will be not bred, and you don't manage the foal the same manner. And you have to make the effort to manage your foal from embryo transfer, because at 6 months, when you want to separate the mare from the foal, it was a wild horse, and there is maybe it's stupid to say that, but the manner to manage the horse from his own mare and the recipient mare is not the same, because they don't have exactly the same manner of life.
The way I base my my thing over it is that, like, I've had mares, because I don't choose my own embryo mares because they come out of a pool. I've had mares where I can't. They chase me out of the box when the foal is born. They attack us. We put them in the field. We can't catch them. We can't do their feet. I mean, they're really monsters. And the foals, you wean them, and they're as nice as can be. And I haven't had an issue. So that's why I base my opinion on, I think, well, I won't be able to catch the foal, or I won't be able to get near it, but I haven't had problems with those things. So that's why I feel that it doesn't really influence, but that it's just from a practical standpoint.
From a selfish point of view, I could stay here all night going through these, and there's lots of interesting questions, and I would thank you for submitting them. And as I said, if there's some burning question that you really want the answer to, maybe come up quickly afterwards. I just want to thank Plusvital again for your support. And actually there was... a theme that has come up in some of the conversations about the need for diversity of bloodlines and the risks of that lack of diversity. Actually, it's a really, really big problem on the thoroughbreds, and Professor Hill has actually put out an article on that previously in recent weeks or months, I think. I was actually reading it recently, so just have a look at it about some of the downsides, I guess, of a very closed population and a limited gene pool. It might be worth looking at in terms of future material. So thank you again. Thank you to all the guys that helped, the guys on videography and photography. But a huge thank you to the speakers who, some reluctantly, agreed to do this. I really, really appreciate it. And I've tried to put together a group of people who I find fascinating and have all been incredibly successful, and I have enjoyed hours of conversation with these guys, and I'm very grateful that they gave some of that time to you as well for your benefit and for the greater good. So can we have one final round of applause for our speakers? Safe home.